Hello, listeners. This is Janine
and Kristen
from Henrico Casa. You are listening to our podcast, Vigilant Voices. Living life every day. Hello, listeners, and happy spring.
Yes, and welcome back to Vigilant Voices, our podcast from Henrico Casa, where we explore ways to support children and families who have experienced abuse or neglect.
Yes, and our goal for this podcast is for us to know more about the challenges facing children and families in order for no child to face continued abuse, neglect, or trauma.
Yes, and today I'd say we're talking less about a challenge for children and families and more about a priority.
Okay. And, I think when Kristen, you and I were talking about this, it's something that's actually profoundly simple.
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk about the idea that every child needs to feel like they matter.
Yeah, which again sounds so simple, right? Who doesn't feel like she matters? Alice, one of the children we're serving right now, and really, I'd say all of her siblings probably feel like that,
right?
And that's why I wanted to share Alice's story with you all today. And again, we've changed her name for privacy, but Alice is the right age to be a high school student, but her school social worker had called Child Protective Services when Alice didn't show up for her first week of high school.
Okay.
And so Alice's case kind of started to work through the court system, and CASA was appointed. And so Alice was assigned an advocate who pieced together that Alice and her siblings were experiencing both physical neglect, like not being fed and clothed properly, but also emotional neglect, like being completely ignored by the caregivers in their home.
Yeah, I mean, this makes me sad for all of the kids in that environment, right? Alice, who should be enjoying high school as a student, and then what's happening with her younger siblings as well.
For sure, because, no one wants to feel overlooked or not wanted. And so this advocate is now setting out to make sure Alice knows she does matter.
Well, and I know that you will fill us in, and I certainly look forward to learning more about Alice's story at the end of this episode, Kristen. But I know that she matters.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
All kids matter. But I also know that research shows something interesting. It's actually not just whether children matter in the objective sense. What really shapes their development is whether they feel like they matter. Like, what are their feelings about it?
Yeah, researchers describe mattering as the feeling that you're valued and that the feeling that your presence makes a difference. And so to really feel like they matter, a child's internal message needs to be something like, I'm important to someone and my existence has meaning.
Right. And that feeling starts early and much earlier than most of us might think.
Yeah.
And even babies are able to form these feelings as they are constantly learning from the interactions with the adults in their lives.
Right, because every time a caregiver responds to a baby's smile or cry, that's what researchers call a serve and return type interaction, because the baby does something and the caregiver responds immediately. And those moments literally shape brain development.
That's right. And, I joke in this, but no one wants to play tennis by themselves.
Right.
And that's where that and return comes in. And the return does help, like you alluded to, Kristen, shape brain development, making those neurological connections. It's like building the brain's architecture.
Yes.
And over time, they also send then that powerful emotional message of, you are worth my attention. I'm going to pay attention to that smile, that cry, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And so that's 100% true and a healthy pattern of development. But listener, think about then what that means for little ones who have experienced abuse or neglect, right? They are receiving the exact opposite message from their caregivers. You are not worth my attention. And their brains then are making different unhealthy connections.
Yeah, or confused, right? None at all. I'm asking for something and I'm getting nothing in response.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we see this with the children at CASA all of the time, because it's like, instead of hearing you matter, their experiences, none of which they created, right, have communicated messages like, well, your needs are inconvenient to me right now.
Yeah.
Your voice doesn't count. Your feelings don't count. And then frankly, it's just the overarching sort of lesson that they're learning is that adults won't meet your needs. They won't meet my needs, right?
Yeah, and that's why the work of CASA advocates and other caring adults like you, listener, is so critical, right? A consistent adult can begin to rewrite that message in the child's mind.
And I mean, it does take consistency and time.
Oh, yeah. But we can be the consistent adults, right? So we can see them and hear them and respond to their needs.
And I really don't think that we can overstate how important this is. And it's critical in the early stages, birth to 5, when the brain is doing the majority of its development. But it is also crucial at all ages and stages.
Yeah. Because
when kids feel like they matter, it really does affect nearly every part of their development. And the research is very clear that it shows a link to stronger mental health, resilience, and even protection against loneliness and depression later in life when they feel like they do matter.
Yeah, which makes total sense. And I mean, think about it. When you believe you matter, confidence forms, right? So you're more likely to speak up. You're more likely to try new things or build relationships.
Or fail.
Yeah, right. I guess I'd say you're more likely to kind of live life to the fullest, right?
I agree. And so then on the other side of that coin, when children don't feel like they matter, well, they may withdraw.
Yeah.
Sometimes they might act out. I mean, if we think about it, if a child's need to matter isn't being met, or let's say positive messaging isn't occurring at home, the child's need to matter doesn't disappear. They just look for it somewhere else.
Yeah. And if they don't experience healthy ways to matter, they're going to seek attention in risky or maybe even harmful ways.
That's right. So let's talk then maybe about what adults can actually do in order to intervene. So if a child doesn't seem to feel like they matter, or an adult is concerned, that they don't have that feeling inside them, like what can we do?
Yeah. And the most important thing to do is also the simplest in theory. It's to give the child attention.
Yeah. And I think we might in this case say, let's go a little further, that it needs to be purposeful, but also undivided attention, like truly giving them attention.
Which means we need to put our phones down, right? Like we need to make eye contact. We need to listen. Because when a child is telling us something, even if it's about some video game or like a random story about school, right? Like whatever your response is, it communicates whether their voice is mattering to you.
Right. And another simple thing we often overlook is using a child's actual name. So when we're giving them attention, we're also using their name. Good morning, Marcus. Or I'm glad you're here today, Ava.
Yeah. Right? We don't think to use their names because clearly we know them, right? But using their name communicates, I see like you, like specifically you. So let's see. Another tip would be to really get to know the child, right? Like what excites them? What frustrates them? What are they proud of? When adults notice and remember the details, children are more likely to feel seen as individuals.
Right. And similar to the name concept, like actually say it, right? I mean, that reinforces and communicates that you know the child and you've heard what they've shared with you.
Right.
So something like, I know storms scare you. Do you want to look at the weather forecast together so we can come up with a plan?
Yeah, I think that's great, Janine. And when we're doing these things, like giving the children attention, communicating that they matter and so forth, I think we need to keep an eye out for something called anti-mattering. Basically, messages that make children feel invisible or unimportant.
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely be watching for these things because sometimes they are subtle and they're probably often unintended.
Right. Yeah.
But that's where we all need to catch ourselves so that we don't negate the efforts that we are making to try to build the child up.
Yeah.
Right?
And like on simple terms, an immediate example that comes to mind is looking at a phone while your child is talking.
Right.
Like you may even be listening to them, right? But your lack of eye contact makes it seem like you don't fully care or that they don't fully matter.
Yeah, you're choosing to do something else when they're trying to talk to you. Some other examples that come to mind are ignoring a child's questions. So if they've asked a question, but you don't know how to answer it,
Mm-hmm.
you just pretend they didn't ask it. But then also just not being present if they are talking to you, just to like not remember what they've told
Right,
you know,
right.
or talking about them, but not necessarily to them directly.
Yeah, those are all good examples. And, for those of us who are maybe in a helping profession or, for our advocates who are working CASA cases, we don't ever want a child to feel like they're just a number or
Right.
just another case. So that's something else that comes to mind. Like, let's not make them feel like just another student or just another client.
No, that's a really good suggestion. And, unfortunately, I think for our children who have experienced a lot of abuse and neglect and maybe in the foster care or court system, unfortunately, I think this happens more often than we'd like to admit because there's just so many people in their lives.
Yeah. And if or when this happens or when any type of, conflict or issue arises, like it's okay, right? Like it's a mistake we've made. What matters most is what we happen moving forward.
Absolutely. I mean, none of us are perfect. We're going to be on the phone sometimes and we have to. But, I think it's when an adult can apologize and then work to reconnect, then they're telling the child, you're worth making this effort for me. Right?
Yeah. Like you're worth or it's worth it to me to fix this with you.
Exactly. So this kind of brings me back, Kristen, thinking about Alice. And so, tell us more about her case or how she's doing and, have the adults in her life tried to improve the circumstances of the environment and just repair things.
Yeah, so glad you asked, right?
Yes.
I'd say Alice is starting to feel like her voice matters.
Okay.
She has an advocate who is now visiting her once a week and really making an effort to get to know her. And so this advocate is doing the things we've talked about. She's using her name and actively listening and responding and remembering what Alice says. The advocate has taken an interest in sci-fi movies and crafting, in order to connect with Alice.
I think that's really cool, right? I mean, because that might not be the advocate's passion, but that's such a great example of listening and responding and try to find connection.
Yeah. And so in these conversations, the advocate has learned that Alice's caregiver was herself abused as a child.
Okay.
She had her own trauma she was dealing with. And, in response, didn't really know how to make Alice feel valued.
Right. And, I think that makes sense because then the mother wasn't raised feeling like she mattered, right? And nurturing a child is a skill. If you haven't seen it modeled effectively in your own life, then it's something that needs to be taught and learned.
Yeah. And in this case, it's being coached. So when this advocate visits Alice, she's also coaching the caregiver a bit on techniques for showing Alice and her siblings that they matter. There are other concerns in the house that are still being worked out.
Sure.
But this emotional piece has changed a lot, and you can see it changing how Alice is behaving.
I think that's great because maybe now she doesn't have to act out to be seen
Yeah,
and heard, right?
exactly.
That's huge improvement.
Yeah. And, just a reminder, listener, that kids are so resilient. And so if we're consistent with our messaging that they matter, it's amazing how quickly they start to believe it.
Yep. No, and I think that's completely true. And so as we wrap up today's episode, we always like to leave you with a call to action, and it's in the form of a simple challenge of sorts.
Right. We want you to intentionally send 3 messages of mattering to a child in your life this week.
Oh, I like that. And okay, all right, the challenge is also to be creative.
Yes.
Don't do the same thing 3 times, right? This could look like making an effort to listen without interrupting, or remembering something that is important to them, or directly saying, I am just really glad you're here.
Yeah, small moments like these add up to mean a lot.
Because when a child believes they matter, they begin to see themselves as someone whose life has true value.
And that belief is life-changing. Thank you for listening to Vigilant Voices, Henrico Casa's podcast. We have a vision for all children to live in safe, healthy homes. You can help us make that happen. Tell a friend about our podcast and find us on social media.
I believe in the better days.